So we just got through talking about the Beatles album. Mine has the George Martin compilations on side 2. And I just read the track list. I don't know if you heard it or not, Michael, on the 1999 version with the 15 tracks on it, all Beatles songs, no orchestra. And boy,
and minus A Day in a Life on that too, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's the only song missing off of and it was released on CD, wasn't it? Primarily, you would have thought.
I'm not.
You would have thought it could have fit.
Sure.
You would have thought it would have fit, and that's my only criticism of that album. As you know, Royce, I've said I think they should just delete the original album, let the collectors grab, what's left. And
I did.
Yeah. and I'm going to even make a prediction. I think that's what they're going to do.
With the later box set.
Yeah, with the 1999 album version, they will include A Day in a Life, and they're going to use this new technology, right?
Okay.
And because that album, the mixes sounded better in many cases, right? It was a clearly superior Beatles sounding album, and I've always said I wish that it had just been put in canon where it belongs, right? But now with the new technology, I think they're going to really do that up. And the way, what do you think about this, David? The whole thing about the releasing of the Red and Blue album instead of Revolver, what does that mean? It seemed like we were on track about what was going to be released, and they've thrown us a curve. What do you think?
There may be something going on with trying to get that one done from a technical standpoint, and they have this other new song thing to push. Plus, it's a bigger cash cow, let's face it. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, that album just sits in such a weird place in my mind, When it first came out, I was in my early 20s, so still kind of teen-minded, as most men are in their early 20s. And I bought it.
Isn't that the truth?
And I poured through the differences. I've long since forgotten them. And what it did is that album just... I listened to the hell out of it for 6 months and then just gradually quit listening to it because I was more interested in, I had already quit listening to the American albums. I wanted what the great masters wanted us to hear. And that's primarily my focus. Getting back to the Revolver thing here, David. Do you think it's maybe because they have less outtakes to really dress this up in a box fashion? Because they were out of songs when they went in to record that album. They had nothing, they had toured their asses off. They had poured all their stuff into Help. And all of a sudden, they produced. That's why it's my favorite Beatle album. But subsequently, they got what, David, was it a month? Do either one of you know? A month on that album that it took to record it? I think it was about a month.
It wasn't very long.
Yeah, and they may have written a couple of songs just before they got in, but basically,
George
this
Harrison wrote a couple.
Yeah, and they had an intent, and it's the first what I consider true album of rock and roll, certainly, if not pop music, with the exception of maybe, as I've stated before, Frank Sinatra, when he would do those mood albums. That would be like a concept album and an album to be listened to as an album, right? But in pop, especially rock-influenced pop and rock and roll, Revolver is the first true album. No Beatle album out before it wasn't. And George Martin always, to his last days, said that was true, that they recorded it with the intent that album was a complete work to be listened to as a whole, Mm-hmm. And so that's why I love it so much, and I'm so disappointed And with this album being released because of this non-Beatles song, which I'm against totally, and watch it come out and be fantastic, and I love it, but I'm against it. I'll never see it as a true last Beatles song any more than the stuff from Anthology was. You know, to me, the Beatles died, well, they died in 1970 officially, and in 1980, any chance of them getting back together was gone. So I was never a big fan of those. And I'm seeing, okay, so now we're slapping this on. And I know for people 50 and under, okay, this is the album that everybody, you know, I wouldn't have been a Beatle fan if that album hadn't been out. I've heard tons of that in the last few weeks since they've announced this, right?
Yeah.
And I hear that, but I don't think it's true. I think the Beatles' magic and the power of their stuff would have eventually got you. It may have taken you a few years.
It was a booster. It was a booster shot, Michael.
Yeah, and like Bruce, who's often up here. I'm really missing his presence, Bruce.
Yeah,
but,
he's
you know,
invited.
I think he said this was an album that if it hadn't been out, you know, or at least it introduced him. I hope I'm not misquoting him. You know, to the Beatles, and for that, yeah, I guess they're okay. And on top of that, the song listing. What do you think, you guys? The song, you know, track listing is good. It plays well. Yeah. Those tracks, they sound like they belong on the album.
They do.
So, but I still have this love-hate relationship with it, and especially since they're going to do this one up and add more.
Here, you know, it's funny you said that because it just reminded me of something. I know people that got introduced to the Beatles through that set, right? And they learned those songs in sequence. And I remember having somebody over once and playing a song from the regular album, and they expected this other song to be next. And they were like, what the hell's wrong with this record? I'm like, wait a minute. Don't you realize, you know, they have this whole...
And that's kind of what happened to me when I started collecting the English versions back in the day when we could first grab them, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going... But that's not right, you know? Right. So that's why I'm such a major advocate. Let's just get down to these, 12 albums and then add the 13th album when they can finally do Yellow Submarine up right. Because I'm not a fan. You know, I even did a video ranking the Beatles albums, and out of 13, it was number 13.
I remember that.
I remember that.
But what do you get? You get, I mean, you only get 4 songs. You know, 2 of them aren't even
new ones. Yeah.
Yeah, they were older recordings and would wind up on other albums. So I don't even consider those songs when I hear it. So you have 2 George Harrison songs, one for sure. And if memory is serving me right tonight, I think both of those tracks were possibilities for Sgt. Pepper's, and they actually sent George, at least one of them anyway, they sent George back to the drawing board and said, George, we got something special here. We can't do this with that. So that's why it wound up on the album. And then you have a throwaway by Paul, but then you have one magnus opus on the album, which is Hey Bulldog, one of my favorite Beatle tracks. And it's stuck on that album.
Should have been on a white album.
Can you imagine if that would have wound up on the white album? I wonder how many people would be choosing that album higher on their list anyway, David.
Well, you know, that's an old Jeopardy question. Yeah. Name the album that no one ever flips over. What is the original Yellow Submarine album?